Welcome to this episode of How School Broke Your Life. Hi, my name is Novel Tank, and in this video, I'd like to examine how school broke your life, how it actually breeds confusion in us about ourselves, about life in general, and finding our place within it. Now, I became a father in 2024, and ever since then, I've been trying to very critically understand exactly how schooling, how education ends up changing us and how what is good, what is not good, what works, what doesn't work. And it's this journey that led me to create this series of How School Broke Us. I think school ends up fractionalizing knowledge. It takes math and science and art and literature and treats it as its own separate branches. It's not even own separate branches, but its own separate species of trees. But really, all human knowledge is ultimately connected to every other piece of human knowledge and human understanding. And I think this is the issue at hand. These ideas are ultimately not separate. Math connects to science, and science connects to art and literature. Some of our greatest scientists have actually been deeply inspired by art, by literature, and some of the most incredible people who have written beautiful plays and stories have been inspired deeply by the sciences, by the universe, by a lot of these aspects of nature that people study intensely in science and mathematics. When school ends up fractionalizing every one of these subjects, we tend to end up thinking that, well, art people are different than people who are into science, who are different than people who are into math. Now, of course, people have their different strengths and weaknesses, but that doesn't mean that these branches of human understanding are different species. They're not different plants altogether. They're actually all just falling under the same human umbrella, the same human umbrella of human knowledge. And so if you ever felt yourself putting on the hat that I'm not a math person or I'm not an English person or a science person, I think school is a reason to blame. And we aren't able to operate in life and take on that level of responsibility. In fact, some of the greatest thinkers, some of the greatest innovators and inventors, and the happiest people in the world are people who are self sufficient. They're people who do not put on these different hats of understanding. They believe that they can put on all of these hats of understanding. You look at people like Da Vinci, who was deeply interested in all branches of human understanding because he ultimately knew that it was all connected under one tree. And that is the kind of confusion. But we end up losing this as a consequence of thinking that every subject, every aspect of life is somehow disconnected from each other. And school is the root cause of that. So if you've ever felt yourself that I can't begin anew, that I can take this new sharp left turn into doing something that I've always wanted to do, but I can't because it's so different from the quote unquote field I've learned and taught myself in, this is the reason why. We've been taught that, well, this field is different than the thing that you're really interested in. But actually, all pieces of human understanding and knowledge are interconnected deeply. And we start to realize that in our 30s and our 40s, where we do start to see that something we might have learned as a kid is deeply linked to what's happening right now in our life. There's a very famous example of obviously Steve Jobs, who learned calligraphy quite disconnected from computer sciences, but he used his knowledge of calligraphy in building the computer at Apple, right? Because those two things were interlinked. And we're now entering an age where we can't afford to have so many disconnections. In fact, we could never have that level of disconnection, but especially now, we cannot afford to have this type of disconnection. School causes us to be confused about the interconnectedness of all understanding. We think of them as separate things, and that is the root cause of so much worry. School causes us to be confused because of the way they actually teach through didactic learning. Now, didactic learning is very much about one person, the teacher at the front of the classroom, teaching to everyone else, to a group of 5, to a group of 10, 20, 30. It doesn't matter how big or small the class size is, but ultimately it's the teacher at the front who's setting the agenda for what to teach. Now, this is in many ways quite contrary to human nature. If you've ever been around kids, you will know that kids are inherently extremely curious about everything. And it's interesting that when a school teacher comes up to the front and tells people that here's what we are going to learn, we're taking away that level of curiosity that kids naturally have. Kids naturally want to know, what does this mean? What does that mean? How are things connected to one another? Kids are inherently extremely curious. But by taking on the nature of didactic learning, we end up hindering that level of creative, curious thinking and questioning. and we end up encouraging a very passive transfer of knowledge. Of course, this ends up causing confusion in our lives because as we get older, we lose our ability to question, to be curious, and to grow with it. And of course, we don't no longer realize how ideas are interconnected to one another. We learn facts and figures. We learn to read and write. But ironically, most Americans never read a book after they graduate high school again or after they graduate college again. What happened to this type of teaching? I think this is the consequence of any form of didactic learning, which isn't focused on you. I'm coming up to 2 decades since I graduated from high school, and I often ask myself, what was the purpose of a lot of those things that I learned? And I would tell myself, I need to learn this so I can get into college. I can go to a great university. But of course, so much of that knowledge that I learned, I never ended up actually using. And so that question that kids often ask, when am I ever going to use this again? I think is actually quite valid because, of course, we are purposefully left in a confused state. Because people are confused in this way, they end up equating education with schooling. And so they end up chasing the most famous college, not necessarily the best college or the best form of education. They think that a famous college is the best form of education. And so you have a group of people going to schools like Harvard and Stanford or aiming and basing their entire identity on the idea of going to a Harvard or Stanford. I think the real consequence of this is that the more confused we are about who we are and what actually makes us happy, the more controllable we end up being. What are the effects of this on society? I think we have bred a whole generation of people who are extremely specialized in one particular branch of knowledge, but who don't understand the whole. So, if you've ever been to a specialist's office in a medical setting, we often have doctors who don't necessarily understand the after effect or the impact of what they're suggesting with the rest of the human body. Now, this is absolutely crazy, but this happens more often than we might think. A confused population has also led to a financially illiterate population, where people don't understand the very currency of what makes and stirs the pot of modern economic life, finances. It's very telling that in all of this confusion of math and science and this atomized way of learning, we don't learn about finances, the things that actually make it all move together. I think this is a big indictment, and we have a whole group of people who are financially illiterate and end up making financially bad decisions that ends up impacting them for the rest of their life. And I think this is the biggest indictment for how school actually breaks us for the rest of our lives. Another thing that ends up happening when we're so confused is that we end up outsourcing our thinking to other people, to quote unquote experts. And these experts aren't necessarily the most knowledgeable ones, they're the loudest voices. And so we have a whole population tuning in to loud noises on the news channels, telling us how to think, how to feel, who to be angry at. And this somehow gives us the illusion that we are more understanding of the world itself. But actually, this causes even more division than ever before. This actually fractionalizes us more than ever before. It's kind of interesting that when we listen to these people, these loud noises, we end up actually fractionalizing and dividing ourselves by listening to these very loud noises that claim to be experts. We end up separating ourselves from our own fellow man, from our own neighbors, because we think we understand more. But somehow we ended up in the exact same place that we were in our school days, where art and math and science and all of these things were different. And you were a art person, a math person, a science person, a drama person, something or another like that. We end up atomizing and fractionalizing ourselves and our society. I think one of the reasons why we don't feel hopeful about the future is because we are so confused about ourselves right now, and we don't have a good understanding of the world. We've given our thinking away to other people. I think finally, the biggest issue with all of this is that in all of our years of schooling, we aren't really taught to understand ourselves. We might end up understanding these superficial subjects of science and math and geography and history and all of these other sorts of things. And we might even understand that, well, I really enjoy math or I really enjoy science or art or something like that. But we don't really understand ourselves, who we actually are, what actually makes us happy. There's that famous line that says, the unexamined life is not worth living. And the idea that I think, therefore I am. But in reality, it is I am, therefore I think. And in all of our years of schooling, we aren't really taught to understand who we actually are. And so we have a huge consumerist society that ends up chasing everything externally, every form of quote unquote happiness externally, without understanding who we actually are is the source of the happiness that we're trying to chase and find. And I think if we truly understood this part, we would have a much better society. But more than anything, you and I would be a lot happier as well, a lot more peaceful, more joyful, and connected to each other than ever before. We wouldn't have this type of separation and division that we have with our neighbors, with people who disagree with us and whom we disagree with. I'm making this series because I truly believe that if we're going to create a better society, we have to understand what actually broke us, what broke our thinking, and find a new way of going forward from there. Until we shine a light on things that break us, we can't recover and heal from it and then envision a better future. In my next video, I'm going to be continuing on this exploration of how school broke us. I hope you'll stay with me. And in the meantime, I'd love for you to share, how did school break you? What type of confusion did school create in your life? Did pursuing more degrees, more credentials, did it actually create more understanding with you? Or did it lead you more astray? Please leave a comment below. And if you want me to explore a specific topic on how school broke your life, please leave it in the comment below or send me an email. Thanks a lot.